The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland of Kepler 442b, carrying ice crystals sharp enough to cut through metal. Dr. Sarah Chen pulled her thermal suit tighter as she checked the readings on her scanner for the third time in 10 minutes. The numbers hadn't changed. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees, now sitting at -47 Celsius, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. 3 months. That's how long she'd been alone on this godforsaken iceball, manning Research Station Omega while the rest of her team had evacuated due to equipment failures. Sarah knew better. The Galactic Council had pulled funding from the human research programs, leaving Earth scientists stranded on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. She was just stubborn enough to stay behind and continue her work on extremophile bacteria, even if it meant facing the brutal winter season alone. The communication array crackled to life, startling her from her thoughts. Static filled the small laboratory, followed by a voice she didn't recognize. The speaker was clearly not human. The vocal patterns were too rhythmic, too melodic, like a song being hummed underwater. Human vessel. This is Captain Zethkar of the hegemony cruiser Silent Dawn. We are experiencing critical system failures. Our ship is falling apart and we need immediate assistance. Sarah stared at the communications panel. The hegemony, she knew that name. They were one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, the same organization that had abandoned human colonies across the galaxy. The same aliens who had voted to classify humanity as too primitive for full membership, relegating them to observer status and cutting off vital resources. She could ignore the call. Let them freeze in the void like they'd left humans to freeze on worlds like this one. It would be justice in a way. But Sarah had become a scientist to help people, not to let them die out of spite. Her finger hovered over the response button. This is Dr. Sarah Chen at Research Station Omega. What's your situation? Relief flooded the alien's voice. Doctor, our ship's life support is failing. We have 17 crew members aboard, and our heating systems have completely shut down. We detected your research station and changed course, hoping for sanctuary. Sarah looked around her small facility. The station was barely large enough for 2 humans, let alone 17 aliens. The power grid was already strained, keeping just her alive during the storm. And if these were hegemony military, they might just take what they needed and leave her to die. How long until you reach my position? She asked. 6 hours, assuming our engines don't fail completely. 6 hours. Sarah ran calculations in her head. The storm was supposed to last another 14 hours, maybe longer. Even if she shared everything, food, water, heat, oxygen, there wasn't enough to keep everyone alive until it passed. Captain Zethkar, I need to be honest with you. This station isn't equipped for multiple occupants during a storm like this. I'm not sure I can help all of your crew. There was a long pause. When the alien spoke again, his voice was quieter, more subdued. We understand the situation, Doctor. Any assistance you can provide would be more than we deserve. More than they deserved. Sarah frowned. That wasn't the kind of language she expected from a proud hegemony captain. Usually they demanded help as if it were owed to them. Why do you say that? Another pause, longer this time. Because we know what the council did to your people. We know about the abandoned colonies, the cut funding, the classification vote. I was there when they decided humanity wasn't worth the resources to support. Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. And you went along with it? I did. The admission was simple, without excuses. I believed the propaganda about human inferiority. I thought your species was too violent, too unpredictable to be trusted with advanced technology. I was wrong. The honesty surprised her. In 3 years of dealing with Galactic Council members, she'd never heard one admit to being wrong about anything, especially regarding humanity. What changed your mind? We've been watching human colonies for the past year, Doctor. Watching how your people respond to abandonment and hardship. Other species panic, fight amongst themselves, collapse into chaos when resources become scarce. Humans adapt. They innovate. They survive against impossible odds while helping their neighbors do the same. Sarah pulled up the sensor readings as the alien spoke. She could see their ship now. A massive cruiser that should have been able to weather any storm. But the heat signatures were wrong. Entire sections of the vessel were dark and cold. What happened to your ship? Sabotage. The word came out like a curse. There are factions within the hegemony that believe humans should be eliminated entirely, not just ignored. When they learned that I had been questioning our policies toward your species, they arranged for certain systems to fail during our patrol route through this sector. So they were both outcasts now. The thought should have given Sarah some satisfaction, but instead she felt a strange kinship with these aliens flying through the void toward her station. I'm transmitting landing coordinates. There's a maintenance bay that can accommodate a ship your size, but you'll need to work fast. The storm is getting worse. Doctor, I must ask, why are you helping us? After everything the Council has done to humanity? Sarah looked out the porthole at the swirling snow and ice. In the distance, she could see the faint lights of silent dawn growing brighter as it approached through the storm. 17 beings who were about to learn what it meant to depend on human compassion. Because that's what humans do. She said simply, we help even when we shouldn't, even when it's not smart, especially when it's not deserved. She began preparing the station for guests, her mind racing through survival calculations. It was going to be a very long night, and morning was far from guaranteed. But if these aliens wanted to learn what humanity was really capable of, they were about to get a first-hand education. The ship's lights grew brighter against the storm, and Sarah wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or if she was about to prove once and for all that humans deserved their place among the stars. The silent dawn settled into the maintenance bay with a grinding sound that made Sarah's teeth ache. Through the reinforced windows of the bay, she could see frost forming on the ship's hull within seconds of landing. Whatever had damaged their heating systems had done a thorough job. The airlock cycled, and Sarah got her first look at Captain Zethkar. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, with 4 arms and skin that shifted from deep blue to pale silver depending on the angle of the light. His crew followed behind him, a mix of species she recognized from council records. All of them looked exhausted, and several were shivering despite their thermal gear. Dr. Chen, Zethkar said, his voice carrying better in person than over the radio. I cannot express how grateful we are for your assistance. Save the thanks until we're all alive tomorrow, Sarah replied, already running mental calculations. 17 aliens plus herself. Limited food supplies and a power grid that was going to be pushed past its breaking point. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. How many of your crew need medical attention? A smaller alien with feathers instead of hair stepped forward. I am Chief Medical Officer Veltar. 3 of our crew are suffering from hypothermia, and 2 have injuries from when the sabotage caused explosions in our engineering section. Sarah nodded and led them through the station. Medical bay is this way. It's designed for human physiology, but the basic equipment should work for most species. She paused at a junction in the corridor. Captain, I need to ask, do any of your crew pose a security risk? I'm trusting you with my life here, but I need to know if that trust is misplaced. Zethkar's skin shifted to a deeper blue, which Sarah had learned indicated strong emotion in his species. Doctor, I give you my word that no harm will come to you from my crew. We are the ones in debt here. The medical bay was cramped with 5 beings inside it, but Veltar worked efficiently. Sarah was impressed by how quickly the alien doctor adapted to unfamiliar equipment. She'd worked with Galactic Council medical personnel before, and they usually spent hours complaining about primitive human technology before deigning to use it. Your equipment is quite ingenious, Veltar commented while treating a crew member with frostbitten appendages. Very efficient design. We could learn from this. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's not what the Council usually says about human technology. The Council is wrong about many things. The medical officer's voice was matter-of-fact. Without any hint of the usual Council superiority, I've reviewed human medical journals. Your trauma surgery techniques are actually superior to ours in many situations. While Veltar worked, Sarah gathered the rest of the crew in the station's main chamber. It wasn't designed to hold this many people, but it was the only space large enough. She pulled up the station's environmental controls on her tablet. Here's our situation, she began, displaying the power consumption data. This station is designed to support 2 humans for 6 months during winter conditions. We currently have 18 beings consuming resources at a much higher rate. The storm outside is going to last at least 12 more hours, possibly longer. One of the aliens, a reptilian creature with scales that rattled when he moved, spoke up. What are our odds of survival? Sarah looked at the numbers again. If we do nothing different, maybe 30%. The power grid will fail in about 8 hours, which means no heat, no air recycling, and no water purification. The crew exchanged glances. Sarah could see fear in their alien faces, but also something else. Determination. What do we need to do? Zethkar asked. We need to reduce power consumption by 60% while maintaining life support. That means shutting down everything non-essential, rationing food and water, and finding ways to generate additional heat without overloading the electrical systems. An engineer from the back of the group raised a hand. What about our ship? The main power core is damaged, but some of our backup systems might still function. We could try to link them to your station's grid. Sarah shook her head. Too risky. If your damaged systems cause a feedback surge, we lose everything, but... She paused, an idea forming. What about your ship's thermal mass? If we can create a sealed connection between the station and your ship, we might be able to use the ship's hull as a heat sink and thermal regulator. The engineer's eyes lit up. That could work. We'd need to modify both your airlock systems and ours, but it's possible. How long would it take? Sarah asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. Sarah checked her chronometer. That would put them right at the edge of the power grid's limits. We'll have to work in shifts to conserve oxygen. Half the crew works while the other half goes into medical hibernation to reduce resource consumption. Veltar nodded. I can induce temporary hibernation in most species. It will slow their metabolism to about 20% of normal. As the crew began organizing work details, Sarah pulled Zethkar aside. Captain, I need to ask you something. Your ship's sabotage. Was it really because you questioned Council policy toward humans? Zethkar's skin color shifted again. Doctor, there's something you should know. The sabotage wasn't random. My ship was carrying classified documents about Council plans for human colonies. They don't just want to abandon your people. They want to ensure you never become a threat. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. What kind of plans? Biological weapons designed to look like natural plagues, asteroid impacts that would appear to be accidents, ways to eliminate human colonies without it looking like genocide. Zethkar's 4 hands clenched into fists. When I discovered these documents, I couldn't stay silent. I tried to bring them to the Council's Ethics Committee, and they tried to kill you for it. They tried to kill me for it, he confirmed. The explosion that damaged our heating systems also destroyed the evidence I was carrying. But I remember enough to testify, if I live long enough to reach a neutral world. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. This alien captain had risked everything to try to warn humanity about genocide plans, and now both of their species wanted them dead. Captain, she said finally, I think we need to do more than just survive this storm. What do you mean? I mean that if we make it through this, we need to make sure the galaxy knows what the Council is really planning. Humans and aliens like your crew need to work together, or we're all going to end up frozen on worlds like this one. Zethkar extended one of his hands toward her. Doctor, if we survive the next 12 hours, I pledge that my crew and I will help you expose the Council's crimes. Sarah shook his hand, noting how cold his skin was despite the thermal gear. Then let's make sure we survive. We've got work to do. Outside, the storm howled with renewed fury, but inside Research Station Omega, humans and aliens began working together with a shared purpose that went far beyond mere survival. The first challenge came sooner than expected. While the engineering teams worked to connect the ship's thermal systems to the station, the power grid experienced its first major fluctuation. Sarah was in the middle of showing Veltar how to operate the medical hibernation equipment when all the lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in 30 seconds later, bathing everything in dim red light. Sarah's tablet showed the damage immediately. They'd lost 40% more power than calculated, and they'd lost it 3 hours early. Status report, Zethkar called over the station's intercom. Power grid is failing faster than expected, Sarah replied, her fingers flying over the emergency controls. We've got maybe 4 hours before complete failure, not 8. The alien engineer she'd been working with, a mantis-like creature named Kickstor, emerged from the access tunnel between the ship and station. His compound eyes were dark with worry. The connection is only half complete. We need at least 2 more hours. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her during emergencies. It was a trait that had kept her alive on a dozen hostile worlds, the ability to think clearly when everything was falling apart. Then we changed the plan. What can we do in the next hour to buy us more time? Kickstor's antennae twitched as he calculated. We could bypass the station's main heating grid and redirect all power to life support only. But that would mean no heat except body warmth. How cold would it get? Zethkar asked. Sarah checked the environmental readings. Inside the station, maybe minus 20 Celsius. That's survivable for humans in thermal gear for a few hours, but I don't know about your crew. Most of our species can handle short-term cold exposure, Veltar said from the medical bay. But the 3 crew members I've treated for hypothermia won't survive another drop in temperature. Then we keep them warm, Sarah said simply. We create a small heated zone using just essential power and pack everyone else in there. She pulled up the station's layout on her tablet. The main lab has the best insulation and it's the smallest enclosed space. If we shut down everything except minimal life support and heating for that one room, we might be able to maintain survivable temperatures. One of the younger aliens, barely more than a juvenile by the look of him, spoke up. But doctor, that room can't fit all of us. Sarah smiled grimly. Then we get creative about how we fit. For the next hour, the mixed crew worked with an efficiency that surprised everyone. The aliens followed Sarah's instructions without question, and she found herself impressed by their problem-solving abilities. When the lab's furniture couldn't be moved quickly enough through the narrow corridors, Kixtor simply disassembled it with his natural cutting appendages and reassembled it in the corridor. When they discovered that the heating unit for the lab was located in an area that would soon lose power, Veltar jury-rigged a heat exchanger using medical equipment and spare parts from both the station and the ship. But it was the young alien who surprised Sarah the most. His name was Tejrun, and he belonged to a species she didn't recognize. Small, furry, with large eyes adapted for low light. When Sarah mentioned that they needed better insulation for the lab, he disappeared for 20 minutes and returned with what looked like metallic blankets. Emergency thermal wraps from our ship, he explained. They're designed to reflect body heat. If we line the walls of the lab with them, it should improve heat retention by about 30%. That's brilliant, Sarah said and meant it. How did you think of that? Tejrun's fur fluffed with what she guessed was embarrassment. My family runs a shelter on my homeworld. We help refugees who arrive with nothing. You learn to make small spaces warm when resources are limited. As they worked, Sarah began to understand why Zethkar had questioned the Council's assessment of different species. These aliens weren't the arrogant, helpless officials she'd dealt with in formal settings. They were engineers and doctors and ordinary people trying to survive, just like humans. The real test came when they had to implement their plan. 18 beings crammed into a space designed for maybe 6, with only enough power to maintain minimal heating. Sarah had calculated that they'd have enough oxygen if they kept physical activity to a minimum, but calculations didn't account for fear and stress. Everyone needs to control their breathing, she announced as they settled into the cramped lab. Slow, steady breaths. Try to sleep if you can. The more we move around, the faster we use up oxygen. Zethkar positioned himself near the door, clearly taking on a protective role. Doctor, you should rest. You've been awake longer than any of us. I'll rest when the storm passes, Sarah replied, but she was grateful when Veltar appeared with a medical scanner. Your stress hormones are dangerously elevated, the alien doctor said quietly. If you collapse, we all die. Please let me give you something to help you relax. Sarah started to refuse, then realized she was being stupid. Nothing that will impair my judgment, just something to help me sleep for a few hours. The injection was surprisingly gentle, and within minutes Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. As she drifted toward sleep, she became aware of something unexpected. Someone was singing. It was Tejrun, his voice barely above a whisper, singing something in his native language. The melody was haunting and beautiful and somehow soothing despite the fact that she couldn't understand the words. It's a song my grandmother taught me, he explained when he noticed her listening. It's about finding warmth in cold places and light in dark times. It's beautiful, Sarah murmured. She sang it to refugees who had lost everything. She said music was the one thing that couldn't be taken away, no matter how little you had left. As Sarah fell asleep, she heard other voices joining in. Zethkar humming a harmony in his deeper tones, Veltar adding a rhythmic clicking that somehow fit perfectly with the melody. Even crew members from species she'd never encountered before found ways to contribute to the song. She woke 4 hours later to find that the power grid had held, barely. More importantly, the connection between the ship and station was complete. Kixtor and his engineering team had worked through the night, and now thermal readings showed that the combined system was actually more efficient than either the ship or station had been alone. Status report, she said, stretching cramped muscles. Storm is weakening, Zethkar reported. We should be able to restore full power within the hour. Sarah looked around the cramped lab at the mixed group of humans and aliens who had worked together to survive the night. They were exhausted, cold, and probably still in danger, but there was something different about them now. Something that hadn't been there when the Silent Dawn first landed. "Captain," she said, "I think we've proven something important here." "What's that, Doctor?" "That when the situation is desperate enough, species differences don't matter. What matters is whether people are willing to work together and help each other survive." Zethkar's skin shifted to a warm gold color that she was beginning to recognize as contentment. "I think the galaxy needs to learn that lesson, Doctor. And I think we're the ones who need to teach it." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break, and through the small porthole, Sarah could see the first hints of dawn on the horizon. 3 days after the storm ended, Sarah discovered that surviving the night had been the easy part. As she worked to restore the station's full systems, Zethkar approached her with news that made her stomach drop. "Doctor, we've been monitoring Council communications. There's a fleet heading this way." Sarah looked up from the power coupling she'd been repairing. "How long do we have?" 2 days, maybe less. It's a full battle group, 6 heavy cruisers and a dreadnought. They're not coming to rescue us." Sarah set down her tools and followed Zethkar to the communications array. The intercepted transmissions made for grim reading. The Council had classified both the Silent Dawn and Research Station Omega as compromised assets to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. "They're not even pretending this is an accident," she said, scrolling through the tactical orders. "They're planning to glass this entire moon and claim it was a reactor malfunction." Veltar joined them, his feathers ruffled with agitation. "I've been treating our injured crew members, but they're sharing stories about what they've seen on other worlds. Doctor, the Council's actions against humanity aren't random. There's a pattern." Sarah pulled up a star chart on her tablet. "What kind of pattern?" "Every human colony that's been abandoned or suffered accidents has been located near strategic resources or jump routes. The Council isn't just trying to eliminate humanity. They're trying to take over human-controlled space." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind like a lock opening. That's why they classified humans as too primitive for full membership. They needed an excuse to seize our territories without it looking like conquest. Zethkar's skin color shifted to an angry deep purple. "My ship was carrying evidence of this conspiracy when we were sabotaged. Financial records, military deployment orders, even biological weapons specifications designed to target human DNA." "Do you remember any details?" Sarah asked. "Enough. I have what humans call a photographic memory. But remembering won't help us if we're dead in 2 days." Sarah stood and walked to the porthole overlooking the maintenance bay where the Silent Dawn sat connected to her station. The ship was damaged, but Kickstor had been working around the clock to repair critical systems. "What's the status of your ship's weapons and engines?" "Engines are at about 60% capacity," Zethkar replied. "Weapons systems are completely offline. We couldn't fight a shuttle, let alone a battle fleet." "What about your ship's data storage? Any chance you could recover some of those files that were supposed to be destroyed?" Kickstor's antennae twitched as he considered the question. "Possible. The sabotage focused on our main computer core, but there are backup systems throughout the ship. If I could access them without triggering any remaining sabotage protocols, how long would that take?" 12 hours, maybe more. "But Doctor, even if we recover the evidence, how do we get it to someone who can act on it? The Council controls all the major communication networks." Sarah smiled for the first time in days. "Leave that to me. Humans have been dealing with hostile communication networks for centuries. Over the next 18 hours, the makeshift crew worked with desperate efficiency, while Kickstor and his engineering team dug into the ship's backup systems. Sarah set up something the aliens had never seen before, a guerrilla broadcasting station. "The Council controls the official networks," she explained to Tegeron, who was helping her modify the station's communication array. "But they can't control every relay satellite, every merchant ship, every independent communication node in the galaxy. If we broadcast on enough frequencies simultaneously, some of our signals will get through." "But won't the approaching fleet detect our transmissions?" "Absolutely. But by the time they reach us, it'll be too late to stop the information from spreading." Veltar approached with a datapad full of medical records. "Doctor, I've compiled evidence from my own experience. Medical supplies being diverted from human colonies, falsified death certificates, biological samples being collected under false pretenses. If this conspiracy is real, The medical community has been complicit. You're willing to testify to that? Sarah asked. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stop genocide, Veltar replied firmly. By the second day, they had assembled something unprecedented. A comprehensive dossier of evidence documenting the Council's conspiracy against humanity, corroborated by witnesses from multiple species. Zethkar had recovered financial records showing payments to sabotage crews. Kickstor had found deployment orders for fleets positioned to look like they were fighting pirates, while actually targeting human shipping. Veltar had medical evidence of biological weapons testing, but it was Tejerun who provided the most damning evidence of all. Doctor, I need to tell you something about my family's refugee shelter, he said quietly as they prepared the final broadcast package. We don't just help refugees. We help beings who are fleeing council persecution, political dissidents, species representatives who voted against council policies, scientists who discovered inconvenient truths. How many people are we talking about? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands across dozens of worlds. And they all tell similar stories. The council eliminates problems by eliminating the people who cause them. Sarah stared at him. You're telling me there's already a resistance network? Not organized, not coordinated. But yes, there are beings throughout the galaxy who know the council is corrupt and would act if they had proof and leadership. That changed everything. Sarah wasn't just broadcasting evidence to random recipients, she was broadcasting to a network of potential allies who were already primed to believe and act on what they received. As the council fleet approached detection range, Sarah made her final preparations. The broadcast package was ready, the transmission array was configured, and every crew member knew their role. Captain, she said to Zethkar, I need to ask you one more time. Are you sure about this? Once we transmit this information, there's no going back. You'll be marked as a traitor by the Council forever. Zethkar's 4 hands worked steadily at his control station as he replied. Doctor, 3 days ago I believed my government was flawed but fundamentally just. Now I know they're planning genocide against an entire species. The only reason I would have to hesitate is cowardice. And I've learned too much from humans in the past few days to let cowardice guide my decisions. Sarah activated the transmission array, and data began flowing across dozens of frequencies toward hundreds of destinations throughout the galaxy. Evidence of conspiracy, genocide planning, and systematic oppression spread across the communication networks like wildfire. Transmission complete, she announced. The galaxy now knows what the Council really is. On the long-range sensors, the approaching fleet had broken into attack formation. Sarah estimated they had maybe 4 hours before the shooting started. Now comes the hard part, Zethkar said grimly. We have to stay alive long enough for someone to act on what we've sent them. Sarah looked around at the mixed crew of humans and aliens who had risked everything to expose the truth. Then we'd better get creative about survival, because I intend to live long enough to see the Council answer for what they've done. The first energy signatures appeared on the edge of the sensor grid, and Sarah began calculating their extremely limited options for staying alive until help could arrive. The first phase of the cascade worked exactly as Marcus had calculated. As the Zephyrian fleet's precisely targeted energy beams struck the key asteroids he had identified, the massive rocks began shifting from their stable orbits. What had been a relatively quiet section of the asteroid belt suddenly became a maelstrom of tumbling stone and metal, each collision creating more debris and more unpredictable trajectories. Marcus felt the transport beam engage again, instantly relocating the Defiance to the second coordinate. Here the gravitational effects were already visible, as smaller asteroids began accelerating toward the growing chaos. His job was to fine-tune the process, using his ship's weapons to nudge specific rocks at precisely the right angles to maximize the chain reaction. Phase 2 initiated, he reported to Queen Valthara. The cascade is building momentum faster than I expected. These asteroids have been on the edge of instability for probably thousands of years. Excellent, Commander. We're tracking 3 Devourer vessels attempting to maneuver around the disturbance. They appear to be confused by the nature of the threat. Marcus could understand their confusion. The Devourers were used to dealing with direct military confrontation or tactical retreats. They had probably never encountered enemies who responded to superior technology by weaponizing the local environment. It was like bringing a sword to a gunfight, only to discover that your opponent had decided to trigger an avalanche instead of shooting back. The transport beam engaged a 3rd time, and Marcus found himself in the most dangerous position yet. Here, at the gravitational nexus of the cascade, space itself seemed to be coming apart. Asteroids the size of mountains tumbled past his ship with velocities that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Any mistake in positioning would result in the Defiance being crushed instantly. But Marcus had spent years navigating environments exactly like this, and his hands moved across the controls with the unconscious precision of someone who had made these calculations thousands of times before. The difference was that instead of avoiding the chaos, he was orchestrating it. Phase 3 complete, he announced as his final shot sent a cluster of metallic asteroids spinning directly into the path where the Devourer ships would be forced to maneuver. The trap is set. Queen Valthara's voice carried a note of amazement. Commander, I'm reading gravitational fluctuations across a volume of space larger than most planetary systems. How did you calculate the interactions for so many variables? I didn't, Marcus admitted as the transport beam moved him to a safe observation position. I calculated the initial conditions and let chaos theory do the rest. Sometimes the best way to solve a complex problem is to make it someone else's problem. The Devourers were about to discover exactly what Marcus meant. Their ships, designed for stealth and speed, found themselves trapped in a three-dimensional maze of tumbling asteroids, moving at velocities that made traditional evasion impossible. Worse, the gravitational field was constantly shifting as massive rocks collided and fragmented, creating new hazards faster than even their advanced computers could calculate safe routes. For the first time in centuries, the Devourers were forced to decloak their ships to boost power to maximum, in order to avoid being crushed. The moment their cloaking fields dropped, Queen Valthara's fleet had clear targeting solutions. All ships commence firing, she commanded. Target the lead vessel first. The combined firepower of the Zephyrian fleet struck the largest Devourer ship just as it was attempting to navigate between two colliding asteroids. The vessel's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, offered no protection against the massive chunks of rock that the cascade had turned into projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The first Devourer ship cracked open like an egg, its exotic matter power core adding its own contribution to the growing chaos in the asteroid belt. But the remaining two ships were adapting to the new threat. Instead of trying to escape the asteroid field, they began using their superior speed to actually ride the gravitational waves created by the cascade, turning the chaotic environment to their advantage. They're learning, Marcus observed grimly. Devourers are nothing if not adaptable. Then we need to be more adaptable, Queen Valthara replied. Commander, are you willing to attempt something that even I consider dangerously insane? Marcus looked at his ship's status display. The Defiance had taken some damage from flying through the asteroid field, but all major systems were still operational. More importantly, he was beginning to understand how the Devourers were using the gravitational fields to their advantage. Let me guess, he said. You want me to fly directly at them through the cascade zone. I want you to use the same gravitational techniques they're using, but better. You have something they don't have. Intimate knowledge of asteroid field dynamics and the ability to make split-second calculations in changing conditions. It was, as Queen Valthara had said, dangerously insane. But it was also exactly the kind of challenge that Marcus had been unconsciously training for his entire career. Every time he had threaded the needle between tumbling asteroids while racing to reach a mining claim ahead of competitors, he had been preparing for this moment. I'll need precise targeting data from your fleet, he said. And you'll need to coordinate your fire to drive them toward specific positions where the gravitational fields are strongest. Already calculating, Admiral Koreth's voice joined the conversation. Commander, I've studied human military history. Your species has a tradition of individual warriors attempting impossible odds in desperate situations. We call them Hail Mary plays, Marcus confirmed. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but they always change the game. Then let us change this game decisively. Transport engaging in 3, 2, 1. The Defiance materialized directly in the path of the nearest Devourer ship, moving at a velocity that should have been suicidal. But Marcus wasn't trying to survive the encounter through armor or shields. Instead, he was using the gravitational field of a nearby asteroid cluster like a slingshot, allowing the massive rocks to accelerate his ship to speeds that the Devourer pilot couldn't have predicted. The alien ship tried to adjust course to avoid collision, but found itself caught between Marcus's impossible trajectory and a Zephyrian energy barrage that had been precisely timed to arrive at the same moment. With nowhere to go, the Devourer ship made the fatal mistake of trying to use its superior speed to escape vertically from the asteroid field. It flew directly into the path of a metallic asteroid that Marcus had nudged into a collision. Of course, 10 minutes earlier, the explosion was visible from Earth, but the final Devourer ship was proving more dangerous than its companions. Instead of trying to escape, it began targeting the asteroids that were creating the most chaos, using precisely placed shots to destabilize the cascade and create safe corridors for itself. "It's trying to turn our own weapon against us," Queen Velthera observed. "Then we don't give it the chance," Marcus replied, and did something that would have horrified every safety instructor who had ever trained him. He shut down the Defiance's artificial gravity and inertial dampeners, allowing his ship to move in ways that no sane pilot would attempt. Without the artificial constraints of comfortable human physics, the Defiance became something closer to a controlled projectile than a spacecraft. Marcus rode the gravitational currents like a surfer riding a wave, using his ship's momentum and the asteroid field's chaotic energy to achieve impossible maneuvers. The final Devourer ship found itself trying to track a target that was essentially falling in all directions, simultaneously while somehow maintaining perfect weapons lock on its own position. The final confrontation lasted exactly 47 seconds, though to Marcus it felt like hours. Flying without inertial dampeners meant that every turn, every acceleration, every gravitational interaction translated directly to his body as crushing force. His ribs cracked from the G-forces, blood vessels burst in his eyes from the pressure changes, and his hands shook so badly he could barely maintain his grip on the flight controls, but he also flew like no human had ever flown before. The Defiant spiraled through three-dimensional space in patterns that defied conventional physics, using each gravitational interaction to change direction in ways that the Devourer's targeting systems couldn't predict. Marcus wasn't piloting his ship so much as he was conducting a symphony of momentum and mass, turning the entire asteroid field into an extension of his will. The Devourer pilot, despite centuries of experience hunting other species, had never encountered anything like this. Their ship's advanced computers could calculate millions of possible trajectories per second, but Marcus was creating new trajectories faster than any computer could analyze them. He was flying by instinct and intuition, using skills that couldn't be programmed or replicated. When Marcus finally found his opening, it came not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through something uniquely human: the willingness to risk everything on a split-second decision that logic said couldn't possibly work. He fired every weapon the Defiance carried at what appeared to be empty space, then immediately used his ship's emergency thrusters to send himself tumbling directly toward a massive asteroid that was rotating end over end in a gravitational dance with two smaller rocks. The Devourer ship, tracking Marcus's apparent suicide run, moved to intercept what it assumed would be his final desperate attack. But Marcus's weapons hadn't been aimed at the alien ship at all. They had been aimed at the gravitational balance point between the three asteroids, the precise location where a small application of force would destabilize the entire system, as the three massive rocks suddenly began accelerating toward each other in a gravitational collapse that Marcus had triggered. The Devourer ship found itself trapped in a closing vise of stone and metal moving at impossible speeds. The alien vessel's shields held for exactly 2.3 seconds before being overwhelmed by kinetic energy equivalent to several nuclear weapons. The ship crumpled like paper, its exotic matter power core going critical and adding one final burst of chaotic energy to the asteroid field. Marcus barely survived his own maneuver. The Defiance skimmed past the colliding asteroids with less than 50 meters to spare, its hull scraped and scorched but intact. As he finally restored his ship's inertial dampeners and artificial gravity, the sudden return of normal physics hit him like a physical blow. "Commander Webb," Queen Velthera's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. "Please respond. Your ship's transponder indicates severe damage." Marcus tried to answer but discovered that his vocal cords weren't working properly. The G-forces had done something to his throat, leaving him able to produce only a raspy whisper. Still alive, Your Majesty. All Devourer ships. Confirmed destroyed. Confirmed. Commander, your ship's life support systems are failing. We're locking onto you for emergency transport. Wait, Marcus managed to croak. My ship. The Defiance. She got me through this. Can't just leave her. There was a pause, and when Queen Valthara responded, her voice carried a warmth that Marcus hadn't heard before. Commander, the Defiance will be recovered and restored with full honors. No ship that fought as bravely as yours will be abandoned. The transport beam that brought Marcus aboard the Zephyrian Medical Bay was gentler than silk, carefully compensating for his injuries during the transfer process. As consciousness faded, his last coherent thought was wondering whether humanity would believe any of this when he tried to explain it in his mission report. He woke up 3 days later in what appeared to be a garden. The medical bay of the Crimson Dominion had been configured to provide an Earth-normal environment, complete with plants and flowers that his damaged mind initially insisted couldn't possibly exist on an alien ship. But the medical scanners humming softly around his bed were clearly not human technology. Commander Webb, Queen Valthara, was sitting beside his bed, her massive form somehow managing not to seem threatening in the peaceful environment. How do you feel? Marcus took inventory of his body and was surprised to find that most of the pain from his injuries had disappeared. Better than I have any right to feel, considering what I put myself through. Your medical technology is impressive. Zephyrian healing methods are very advanced, but we cannot take credit for your recovery. Your species appears to have remarkable natural resilience. Our medical AI predicted that your injuries would require weeks to heal, but you've recovered in days. Humans are stubborn about dying, Marcus said with a weak grin. It's probably an evolutionary adaptation from living on a planet that's been trying to kill us for millions of years. Valthara's patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated amusement. Yes, we've begun studying your species' homeworld. It's quite remarkable that any intelligent life survived to develop technology on such a hostile planet. Most species evolve on much more stable worlds. Maybe that's why we handled the Devourers differently than they expected, Marcus suggested. We're used to dealing with existential threats, perhaps, but there was more to your success than just resilience, Commander. You demonstrated something that no Devourer had ever encountered before. The ability to make complex tactical decisions while under extreme physical stress, using incomplete information and equipment that was barely adequate for the task. Marcus considered this. You mean we're good at making things up as we go along? You're good at adapting to impossible circumstances and finding solutions that don't exist in any tactical manual. The Devourers have spent millennia learning to predict and counter conventional military responses. But your response wasn't conventional in any sense. So what happens now? Marcus asked. I assume Earth is going to want a full report on everything that happened out here. Valthara's patterns shifted to deep gold, and Marcus realized that she was about to tell him something important. Commander, your actions have prevented a war that would have consumed both our civilizations and fed the Devourers for centuries to come. But more than that, you've demonstrated that humans possess qualities that make them uniquely valuable as allies, such as the ability to think creatively under pressure, the willingness to sacrifice personal safety for the greater good, and most importantly, the capacity to trust other species even in life-threatening situations. These are rare qualities in the galaxy. Marcus felt a growing suspicion about where this conversation was heading. Your Majesty, are you offering humanity some kind of alliance? I'm offering humanity membership in the Galactic Concordat, the alliance of species that has maintained peace in this sector for over a millennium. Normally, species must demonstrate technological and social development over several centuries before they're considered for membership. And humans qualify after one space battle? Humans qualify because one human prevented an interstellar war through courage, creativity, and an unprecedented willingness to trust alien technology with his life. Commander Webb, you didn't just save your species and mine. You've opened the door to the stars for all humanity. As the implications of what Queen Valthara was telling him began to sink in, Marcus found himself wondering if this was all an elaborate dream brought on by his injuries. But the weight of the moment felt real, and the responsibility that was being placed on his shoulders was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Your Majesty, he said finally, I think I need to call home.